Hey, what's up guys? Today I'll show you a horror series, Cabinet of Curiosities, The Murmuring. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The story begins with the narrator telling us about birds and how it is believed that they carry our beliefs and hopes up to the gods. On this note, he states that today's story is called The Murmuring and walks away one last time. Now we see a bird scientist named Nancy talking about Dunlin birds in front of her bird club. She shows a series of images where a flock of Dunlin birds forms a collective sphere against a falcon predator, morphing into a cloud and even a large bird. The viewers are amazed to see this defense mechanism, and then Nancy states that even 1,000,000 Dunlin birds can coordinate their shapes together. Nancy guesses that the birds might be telepathic, and then she gives a shout out to the sponsors of her club. She then goes on to show a video of the Dunlin birds making more figures together in impressive fashion. Now everyone socializes over some drinks, and Nancy is asked what she likes most about birds. She states that it's their freedom because even she would like to fly away from the world sometimes. Nancy's husband has a chat with a friend who mentions that Nancy and her husband have experienced something tragic. In order to distract themselves from the tragedy, Nancy and her husband go on a bird-watching trip. Their guide leads them to an abandoned house, which is still well kept. The guide believes the owners had more money than sense, and then Nancy checks out a portrait of an army man with his family. After the guide leaves, Nancy and her husband proceed to record Dunlin birds in the evening. At night, they get cozy in bed, and husband asks for hormone therapy, but Nancy says that she's very tired, causing her husband hormone frustrated. Later in the night, Nancy hears a baby crying and also some rushed footsteps. Suddenly, the static from her tape recorder goes crazy, so she and her husband rush downstairs to check it out. Nancy fixes the tape recorder and tells her husband to go back to sleep. Later, the couple sets out for another recording session. Husband makes some sandwiches for Nancy, but she simply ignores his gesture and lies about eating them. Afterward, Nancy checks up on some of her recordings and suddenly hears the rushed footsteps once again. She panics for a bit, but it just turns out to be her husband. Now, Nancy reads a book on mating, and it inspires her husband to play some romantic music. He dances around and even gets Nancy to groove with him for a bit, but she eventually tells him she's not in the mood. This makes her husband hormone frustrated again, but he has to deal with it. In the night, husband snores away like a pig and keeps Nancy awake. But then she hears the rushed footsteps once more, after which some banging noises catch her attention. Nancy tries to wake up her husband, but it's of no use as he's too busy snoring his smelly mouth. She eventually follows the sounds to the attic and is amazed to see the Dunlin birds gathered over there. Nancy immediately wakes up her husband so that they can record this inexplicable phenomenon. When she's alone, Nancy gets disturbed by some whistling downstairs. She assumes it's her shitty husband and asks him to keep it down, but the whistling becomes ominous, suggesting it's someone else. So Nancy goes downstairs to check it out, but can't find anyone there. Then, she faces issues with the static recording and even hears a ghost child saying he feels cold. Nancy makes her husband listen to the recording, but he can't hear anything except the birds. Husband feels that Nancy isn't getting enough sleep, but she snaps at him out of frustration and checks out the photograph of the army man she saw earlier. There, she spots a little boy, who might be the one she heard in the recording. Suddenly, the birds fly away, much to the couple's dismay, so they have to go back into the open to record them again. In the night, husband reads a book about murmuration, but Nancy seems distracted. She states that she can't understand why the family living there simply abandoned it without cause. The hormone-rich husband doesn't care about her worries and tries to ask for her hormone therapy one more time, but Nancy tells him not to touch her sexy body because there's no point of doing so. This hints that the tragedy the couple had encountered in the past might be a lost child. Husband gets upset and walks away, much to his own disappointment. Later in the night, Nancy sees a ghost boy in front of her and screams in a chicken voice out of fear. Husband awakens from a pig-like sleep and asks what's wrong, but the ghost boy disappears, leaving no ghostly traces behind. So Nancy says she just had a bad dream. The next day, Nancy gets drawn to the library section. There, she finds an embroidered cloth with birds, a woman, and the word freedom on it. It makes her suspicious because she always mentions this word, so she calls her husband to show him the embroidery. He doesn't think much of it, but Nancy believes the woman living in this house felt trapped, just like she is feeling with her husband. The couple has another fight using their words, not muscles. Nancy goes to sleep. She wakes up and spots a little girl, who is revealed to be her dead daughter. A ghost hand touches Nancy from behind. She notices the ghost boy running down the stairs. Nancy follows him into the library, where she finds letters scattered everywhere. One of these letters reveals that the army man was cheating on his wife with a mistress and even had a child with her. Nancy gets upset and keeps complaining about the cheating army man to her husband. He tells her to focus on her own work rather than the affairs of someone else, but this makes her upset and she walks away. Soon after, Nancy spots the Dunlin birds back in the attic, so she asks her husband to come, but he decides to record the birds by the shore instead. At night, Nancy hears the static again, followed by the sounds of the ghost boy, saying that his mom is mad at him. The ghost mom lets out a scream, so Nancy panics like a chicken with goosebumps. After that, she spots the ghost boy crying in front of her. The ghost boy runs away, not flying but using his ghostly legs, so Nancy follows after him, but gets creeped out upon seeing his ugly face. Nancy takes a bath to refresh herself, but then she hears loud banging on the door, followed by a vision of the ghost boy drowning in the bathtub. Suddenly, the door opens up and the ghost mom finally shows up to flex her ghostly figure. Nancy screams, naked and confused, so husband rushes to her aid using his ghost-proof muscles. He tries to bring Nancy back to her senses by saying she needs to express the grief of losing their daughter, but this only makes her upset, leading to another argument. The next day, the guide arrives with some supplies, so Nancy asks him about the ghost mom and ghost boy and the house's history. After some intense questioning, the guide reveals that the ghost mom had drowned her own son in this house and committed suicide after her sinister act. Husband watches on from a distance as Nancy scolds the guide for not telling her this story, even though it's 30 years old. As expected, the guide angrily rebukes Nancy for being ungrateful because he went out of his way to get her and her husband this house to stay during their bird recording sessions. The guide also tells Nancy she has a morbid fascination with other people's misery because he doesn't believe in ghosts. After the guide leaves, husband asks Nancy what she was talking to the guide, but she ignores his questions. This leads to another argument, and husband pleads with Nancy to tell him what's going on. Nancy finally confesses she's been seeing the ghosts of the dead mom and her dead son, but husband doesn't believe her ghostly bullshit. The couple argues again, using words first and possibly muscles later, and husband calls out Nancy for keeping him out of her life. He's particularly upset because Nancy hasn't cried even once ever since their daughter died. However, she remains inexplicably unresponsive and cold, so husband decides it's best for him to sleep alone on the couch. Nancy wakes up to her husband's alarm in the morning and realizes that she was wrong all along. However, husband has already left the house for a solo recording session, so she can't call him back. Later, Nancy sings to the Dunlin birds, but the windows blow open and then she sees the ghost boy. Suddenly, the ghost mom shows up and chases after Nancy, so she locks herself away from her. Nancy finds the ghost boy again, who is crying because he doesn't know why his mom is mad at him. Nancy says he needs to free himself from guilt because his mom killing him was never his fault. The ghost boy finally achieves salvation and runs into Nancy's arms, but disappears because he is no longer a haunted spirit. Now Nancy hears the ghost mom from upstairs and goes to inspect her. It turns out that the ghost mom was suffering from an illness and had killed herself after realizing the horrific deed she had done to her son. Now Nancy steps out of the house and is surrounded by the Dunlin birds, symbolizing her own liberation from the trauma of losing her daughter. The movie ends with Nancy calling her husband via the radio and apologizing for her behavior. She also says that she is finally ready to talk about their dead daughter. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.